Welcome to Orthodoxy. My name is Andy Schmitt. I'm your host. And this isn't a podcast like the rest. This is going to be different. It's going to be about High Point Church and Nic Gibson and what's happening at that church. And to some people, that might be completely irrelevant, probably to most people who listen to this podcast. At this point, they don't know who High Point Church is. They probably don't know who Nic Gibson is or Pastor Nic Gibson is. They probably don't know who the people who are about to be mentioned in this podcast actually are. They probably never heard of them. And that makes sense because over the past couple of years, I haven't done a podcast on High Point Church. I haven't done a podcast with or on Nic Gibson or on the topic of Nic Gibson or with Nic Gibson. I haven't done any of that. I haven't done anything for, I think, 2 years, maybe even more. I don't know. On High Point Church. And so I'm just going to give a little bit of background before I get into the details here and why I'm doing this and what this means and what the purpose of all of this is. I'll give a little bit of background and I'll tell why afterwards. But this podcast started in 2019. I was 19, 20 years old at the time. I had been involved in youth groups and college ministries and things like that my whole life, not the college ministries, but kind of youth groups and churches my whole life. And I'd felt like at 20, 18, 19, 20, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, there were no answers to theological questions. I was asking questions since I was a kid to pastors and leaders and youth groups and things like that. And I wouldn't ever get any answers. I didn't get any answers until I got older and became kind of helped in the formation of me turning into a degenerate, evil sinner who did terrible things because I was resentful and angry about everything. And they didn't make me do that, but I chose that as a response. And that is kind of what resulted in this podcast because I had come back into the church in some way, come back into my faith or became a Christian. It's hard to tell those details. And I started this podcast with a pastor at the time. His name was Nic Gibson at a church called High Point Church in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm from. And it was one of the bigger churches at the time. In the history of Madison churches, High Point for a long time in the 90s was the biggest church in the city. There was a church split that happened in 2006. A lot of those people went over to another church called Black Hawk Church. Black Hawk Church is now the biggest church in the city. That's just unnecessary information, really, to be completely honest with you. But I find that stuff to be interesting. But anyways, it was one of the biggest churches in the city. It still is probably one of the top 5 biggest churches with just the most congregants, probably between 500 and 1,000. I don't know the details there, how many people go to High Point. But Nic and the pastors there brought me in. They were kind to me. They were nice to me. And Nic and I started this podcast where I was the young guy asking theological questions. He was answering. And I'll just caveat, I say that I didn't get good theological answers growing up. I mean, that's not really the truth. My dad gave me good theological answers. I just didn't want to listen to him. So that's a whole other conversation. But anyways, in the church, in the leadership in the church, I didn't get good answers for questions. And so I thought, let's do a podcast because there are a lot of young people like me who were trying to figure out what does the Bible mean? What's going on in the world? Things are changing rapidly, even through our childhood, technologically, politically, geopolitically. It was just a weird time over the past 25 years. And that's all culminating in whatever's happening in the culture right now, which is a lot of weird things, a lot of strange things. And people wanted answers. I wanted answers to cultural questions, to theological questions, to political questions. And so I started this podcast with a guy named Pastor Nic Gibson, Nicola Gibson from High Point Church in Madison, Wisconsin. And for years, we did the podcast together. We bantered, we went back and forth, and people from the church listened to it. Honestly, it started off like no one listened to it. Probably for a whole year, it was like just close family, friends. I don't even know if my family really listened to it. They have to listen to me outside of this. So it's not like they're going to like, willingly go and listen to me. But anyways, the people listen to it. I mean, a couple people, and we just talked about anything. I mean, the first podcast was on like, what is the Trinity, or can you lose your salvation? And then we talked about dating and all these different things. And it was interesting for young people who I think were getting sort of postmodern, nonsensical answers in their other mega churches or their youth ministries or their parachurch organizations or their college campus ministries. And so I tried to create a resource that would be helpful for young people. And as the years went by, the podcast grew by word of mouth. I've never done any marketing. Maybe I have like put like $100 towards a marketing ad here or there. I mean, I don't know. I have done barely any marketing. And it just grew by word of mouth. And it kind of became something that a lot of young people in the Madison area and the church scene listened to, and people talked about it and whatever. And I heard, mostly from people for a long time, very cynical and rude and bad feedback about how bad of a host I am, and how the only reason that they listen to the podcast is because they want to hear Nic, and things like that, where it didn't bother me at the time. It still doesn't really bother me, mostly because I know it's not necessarily true at this point, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But negative feedback. I have emails from people from the church, like people who are like a decade or two older than me, like emailing me like, you suck at this and you're blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay. I told one guy one day, I said, look, you can come on the podcast, you do the interview, and then we'll let everybody vote. And if they think you were better, I'll just give you the podcast. And he didn't want to do that. he just wanted to, he's all bark, no bite. Anyways, I'm getting all off on all these tangents. All this is to say, I started this podcast in 2019. We started doing theological conversations and cultural and all these things. And it was really fun, and people listened to it, and it grew by word of mouth, and people in the Madison area knew about it. And it became something. I mean, more than, my expectations in the beginning, as, is today, that this would be a podcast that everyone in the world will listen to. So a pastor and other people would say, what's your target audience? Everybody in the entire world. That's what I wanted it to be like in 2019. That's what I want it to be like today. Like, if you're not going to do it so that everybody can listen to it, why would you do it? That's how I think. And so people were listening to it, and it was great. And I got the opportunity to go to be part of the Scott Jensen campaign in Minnesota, which kind of took me in that direction. I went over towards the political stuff and was part of that campaign for a year and a half or so. Started a podcast with him. That was the number 5 government podcast in the world at the time. We lost the election. Can't beat the Democrats in Minnesota. It's very difficult. But learned a lot there. Came back, tried to start a media company, completely failed, and had started it with Nic Gibson and with some other people at High Point Church, because I was still invested. I'd gotten married, and we had given birth to our first kid by this time. So this is, years in the making, and I'm not going to go through all the details, but this is sort of the background of this podcast. And the reason I'm saying this is because about a year and a half, two and a half years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, I did a podcast where I said, I'm not going to have Nic as a co-host on this podcast anymore. I think it was after 4 years of him being the co-host, or maybe 5. I don't know. I should have looked at this stuff before I did this, but I didn't. Several years where it was Nic and I going back and forth, and I did a podcast a couple of years back saying, I'm not going to do it with him anymore. And I'd kind of gone in a separate direction, left High Point Church. We had started going to an Anglican church at the time. And there were some severe disagreements between Nic and myself on the direction of High Point Church, what they were doing behind closed doors, what was being told to the congregation based on what I was hearing in closed meetings and in conversation with Nic. And I think it's important to say, through those years, other than Nic's family, I was with him more than anybody. I was with him all the time. Not all the time, but like a lot. We were with each other a lot. And we were with each other quite a bit. And so I heard a lot of the, inner workings of the church and what was going on. And I was privy to information that I probably shouldn't have been privy to. And I was in conversations that I probably shouldn't have been in, and heard things that I probably shouldn't have heard, and all of that. But I did. And I was there, and I saw a lot more than the average person at High Point ever saw or heard. And so we started to disagree on the direction of things. Nic wanted to appease the culture. He wanted to appease to the liberal slide that the general evangelical church is going towards, and really got into the sort of Tim Keller, CRT, like BLM, whatever stuff. He had a guy come to the church, I can't remember his name, who kind of lectured everybody on a Sunday about how, the riots, the George Floyd riots, are like justified and stuff like that. And it started going that direction. And at first I didn't really care. Because I was like 21, 22 is when some of this stuff really started, because it's like 2020 happened, COVID, BLM, all this stuff. And so everything exploded at the same time. And it was like, what do I know? I just graduated high school, and this is what my introduction into adult life is. It's like pandemic, riots, so it's a little bit difficult to like work through some of these things. Like, what do you believe? And I was sort of trusting the direction for a long time. Well, as time went on, and about 2022, 23, Nic started to develop a relationship with, maybe 2021, maybe earlier, I don't know, but it started to become more prominent, a relationship that he had with a church called End Time Ministries. And this is a church that, one interesting name to say the least, but it's mostly black church. I think probably an all black church run by a guy named Godfrey Stubbs and his wife. He's a pastor. Well, he calls himself like a doctor, pastor. He calls himself an apostle, maybe a bishop at one point. I don't know if he actually has a PhD. I don't know if like a doctor is literally his title or if he just calls himself that. But he's got a lot of titles, which is awesome. Like, that's good for you. And I'm glad that you're literally everything. And I hope that that's all legit. And his wife, Sheila Stubbs, Pastor Sheila Stubbs, I'm pastor with air quotes. They were the co-pastors of the church. She's also a Democratic representative for the state of Wisconsin, Democrat, and a public supporter of abortion, public supporter of transgenderism, public supporter of homosexuality. And just, this is demonstrable. This is stuff that she has put out on her social media accounts. She's voted in favor of. She's outspokenly in support of these things. And I, obviously being somebody who's been in the political realm and believes, as all Christians should believe, that politics, theology, economics, these are all part of the same comprehensive worldview. And I said, Nic, this is weird. Why are we developing a relationship? Why are you developing a relationship with these people? And at first it was sort of, my sense was that it was sort of even evangelistic in some sense. I don't know if he necessarily thought they were legitimate Christians or not. I don't know what his stance on any of that stuff was, but it wasn't ecumenical. He wasn't making a ecumenical church statement that High Point Church is partnered with officially End Times Ministries. And fine, I didn't have a problem with that. I mean, we're in Madison, Wisconsin. You got to kind of deal with what you got here. There's not a bunch of great churches. And I can understand from Nic's perspective, like, you want to know the people in the city that you live in. You don't have a bunch of like super conservative, God-fearing churches here. So you meet somebody, you talk to them, you develop a relationship. I have no problem with that. That's called living in a community. I don't have any issue with that. When I started to have an issue was when High Point declared to their congregation that they were in a ecumenical relationship, partnership with this church. And they had received multiple church buildings all at the same time. And one of them, they decided that they were going to allow End Times Ministries to use. They were going to worship there. And it was Monona Oaks Church, which is a church on the east side of Madison. And they let Monona Oaks worship there. They kind of voted on it, and they did this whole thing. And so I put a podcast out saying, here's who Sheila Stubbs is. Here are the facts of the matter. Because in that voting and in the congregational meetings leading up to this, they didn't really give the whole picture as to who she is, what this church is, and what it's done, and like what the scandals are that surround this church, because there are legitimate scandals. They've held political rallies in their church, which is illegal for a 501c3, and that's been reported on by the Wisconsin State Journal. Sheila Stubbs has obviously been in favor of the things that I've mentioned in this podcast. They've had their congregants go to political rallies for her and like slander people and trash people and yell at people from the crowd. And they're not really like a wonderful beacon of Christianity, like the way that Nic kind of portrayed it, which is whatever. I guess that's just what it is, and that's what their church is. But that was Nic's and High Point's prerogative. They wanted to go in that direction. I was like, this is ridiculous. Why are we supporting this stuff? We can't make an ecumenical statement. We can't give them funds. We can't give them this is bad. This is obviously out of line with the Bible in a million ways. And there's, a million better theologians who could explain it to you, but it's all over the Bible. You don't partner with people who are you don't ecumenically partner with churches and people who are outside of God's church, his visible church. And in this case, that's what High Point Church was doing. And it's incredibly controversial. Not in Madison. It's not controversial in Madison, but in faithful Christian churches, that would be something that would not fly. And I came to find that out later as I talked through these issues with theologians and pastors from all around the country, because I know a lot of different theologians and pastors all over the country. everywhere, different denominations, and some of the most prominent ones in the world. And I had conversations with these people about it. And they're like, that's unacceptable. One of the most prominent ones said, look, the whole situation in Madison sounds like a disaster. You should probably just leave Madison, which we didn't do. And maybe we're stupid for that, but yeah, maybe we are. I don't know. But anyways, that was, I put a podcast out and you can go listen to that. The link for that will be in the description. That's not what all of this is about. It's related to that, significantly related to that, but it's not exactly what this is about. But I had gone a different direction. And so I have a thing written out here. My wife and I wrote this out, and it's a long, thing. So I just like people who don't know about High Point Church, if you're considering going there, I want you to listen to this, okay? If you're like in Madison, you're considering going there. If you're somebody who goes there right now, please listen to this. If you don't, and you just want to listen to this for the gossip of it or whatever, look, if there was a different way of going about this, I would go about it. But I have been shut down at every single path I've tried to take to talk to elders and to talk to people in the church to try to do anything related to having a legitimate biblical approach. They won't allow it. So we're in a time where the only way to get the truth out is if you go in these alternative routes, because the people in power, the people who are controlling the institutions, from the lowest of institutions all the way to the top in the country, have severed relations with the people that are under them, that are within their power, and they don't let those people have a voice. They don't let them talk, and they try to shut them down. And that's backfired, as we've seen in the last couple of years. And so this is the only way that I felt like I could do this. And it took a long time of deliberating, years to deliberate over this and pray and figure out whether or not I should do it. And I'm doing it. And so I just want to say, though, going back to the beginning of all of this, like there was this sort of idea that, without Nic, this podcast is nothing. And people kind of made that insinuation, and they said those sorts of things to me all the time. I had one girl tell me, the only reason I listen to this podcast is for Nic, not for you. Okay. And so I didn't know what would happen after I severed my ties with Nic. And what I learned in the years after that was that people didn't listen to this podcast for Nic. They didn't. They just did. According to the metrics, they didn't listen to it for Nic at all. Last year, my podcast did over 100,000 listens. This year, I'm already at over 120-some thousand. And I'm not even counting some of the other. It's probably over 200,000 last year, if you include, like Peter McCullough put out my podcast to his entire Substack, which is like massive and I couldn't measure those metrics, but probably over that last year. And this year, my goal is 200 or whatever. And I don't do marketing again, and I just put it out there, and people share it and this and that. And so, and then I go look at the listen notes, and Engage and Equip has less listens, and they dropped in listenership after I had left, after Nic and I stopped doing the podcast. And their most popular podcast they ever did was about me. So I just want to say that's not to like pump myself up or anything like that. It's just to say there's sort of a delusion that these people at High Point exist within, and it's this very tight and locked down ecosystem of lies. And I'm going to talk about that. And one of those lies, very small one, insignificant one, was that I was told constantly while I was there was, nobody cares about you. This is all about Nic. Nic is the most important thing. He's the smartest person that's ever existed on the planet. And he's a genius, and we don't know why he's not world famous. And I did work tirelessly for years to try to make him, quote unquote, world famous. Didn't work. Turns out a lot of people don't like Nic because he's arrogant and because he treats people poorly. Outside of those people who agree with everything he says, he treats them poorly, and they don't want to talk to him. They don't want to associate with him. And that hasn't been the case with me on my own, but it was the case when Nic was on the podcast. People didn't like him. People were frustrated when I did interviews with Nic and other people that Nic doesn't let him talk. Nic cuts you off. People were angry. They stopped listening. And so there's an ecosystem of lies at High Point, and it's kind of built around Nic. And so I'm going to go through this timeline that we wrote down, and I have dates, there's some recordings, there's email exchanges. And I'm just going to put it all out there because for years, there's just been a lot of lying. And what I found out this last Sunday was that High Point Church publicly announced, and you can go watch it, it's on their YouTube, they announced a new elder. And I'm not going to even name this person. You can go watch it. You can figure out what their name is. It's not relevant. This person really isn't relevant. They're just a kind of a pawn for whatever Nic's trying to do. But a person who is self-proclaimed homosexual, who has claimed publicly that the Holy Spirit isn't interested in changing people's homosexuality or their sexual identity, and there's sort of side B gay Christianity where they equivocate, but it's basically just side A, you can be a gay Christian. And they're an elder at the church, unmarried, gay, pro-gay, pro-side B, whatever. We can get into the semantics of it. And that's what Nic and everybody's going to want to do. Well, then, technically, if you rip this word apart and you change this letter and you tie it this way and you put a nice knot over it. No, that's not how it goes. He's side B gay Christianity, probably side A. They announced that he was one of the newest elders, and that's kind of through a long deliberation and through a lot of conversations and through just weird circumstances in what I've been engaging with and reading and stuff. I feel like this is time for me to just do this. And then I'll get into it after this. Sorry. And because in 2 weeks, I'm doing the most significant and important podcast interview that I've ever done in my life. I don't want to have this there. I don't want to have this. I want this behind me, I guess. And I want this off my conscience. I've been thinking about it for too long. And it bothers me, the amount of people that have been hurt by Nic and by the church, the amount of people that have been lied to and deceived and that have left the church, maybe are, let's just say, churchless at the moment because of the continual lies and the continual deception and the continual slide towards apostasy, which I think they've reached. I don't think they reached it this past weekend. I think they reached it a long time ago when they decided to partner with people who hate Jesus, who hate the innocent, who want to murder babies. And so I'm not doing this to get more listens. People don't listen to this stuff. They don't really care about what's going on at High Point. I'm not doing it for any of that stuff. There's more important things that I could be talking about. Let's say I know other things. This is not the most important thing in the world, but I'm putting it out there because I think it's important, and I think it's a warning to other people to don't go to High Point. Leave. Show them you're frustrated with your feet. Get out of the church. And if you're still there, then you're absolutely part of the problem. So, all right, we'll run through this whole thing. I'll stop. I'll do these things where I do tangents here and there, and it's just going to be what it is. So on July 12th, 2024, and the timeline's a little bit all over the place, and you'll learn why as things progress in this podcast. But on July 12th, 2024, I did a podcast called Optiv Theology Podcast is Changing, in which I explained why I was no longer allowing my former co-host to be on the show anymore. So if you want more details to that, go listen to that podcast. The link is in the description. I just explained some of that to you. Over the last several years, many things have been happening in the background at High Point Church. And some of these things play into the separation and animosity between myself and Nic. If you've been attending High Point for more than a few years, you maybe have picked up on some of the lingering tension and confusion in the church. Nic has even hinted at it, speaking about over the past few years how he's had some of the hardest years of his life and in his ministry, and not giving much detail to it, but he said that on multiple occasions and sermons over the past couple of years that he just went through a rough patch. He did. And I'm not saying that every internal church conflict has to be shared with the congregation. There's going to be a lot of talk amongst people who listen to this about discretion. It's the wonderful catchphrase. It's a catch-all term now, discretion. We can say and do whatever, we hide everything behind discretion. And discretion is real. All of the terms that get distorted and ruined by people like Nic, who just care about using them for their own power, and their elder boards who just care about power, discretion is real. That's a real thing, and there should be discretion in certain cases. But not in these cases. There should not be discretion in these cases, especially when you're lying to your congregants after about the very things that you're being, quote unquote, discreet about. So there's going to be a lot of discussion about discretion, and I'm not against discretion. I think that it's important, but if you're in a congregation-led church, you have less discretion, and that's just a fact, because the people in the church need to know the information and what's going on in the church for them to be able to make wise decisions. That's the whole point. And that's also why a congregational church doesn't really work. But that's a different podcast for a different time. So I'm not saying that every internal conflict has to be shared with the congregation, but what has taken place at High Point Church since 2023 is more than just small internal conflict. What has happened is that accusations were brought to the elder board regarding Nic's conduct on multiple occasions. And not only have those parties been punished because of it, but these accusations have been buried by the elder board, and the pastors and their confidants have concealed the truth from the congregation under the guise of quote unquote discretion. Well, I don't think it's discretionary to hide the investigation into the conduct of a senior pastor with testimony from some of the closest people to Nic during this time in his life. I think that's called lying for the sake of manipulating and maintaining power. So, in this podcast, I'm going to recount the series of events that have taken place over the last 3 years as my wife and I have experienced them. Okay? That's my goal here. And I'm not claiming to be infallible. I'm not claiming to be right in every single thing that I say. I'm claiming, here's what I've seen. Here's the evidence that I have. And I'm putting it out there for people because I think people are smart. I don't think you're stupid. I think Nic and the elders want you to think you're an idiot and you can't think for yourself. So they have to be discretionary and keep all the information from you and have to be the gatekeepers to all the truth. You're not stupid. If you're at High Point, maybe you feel that way because you've been kind of belittled by the pastors and the elders and they kind of make you feel dumb. You're not. You're a human being and you're smart and you have the capacity to know and understand things and make decisions. So I've waited a long time to share a lot of this information and haven't so far because I'm not the only person with the burden to tell these things. But seeing as other parties continue to neglect the truth, I've decided that it's now time, neglect telling the truth, that it's now time to tell the truth. And what's even more is that as High Point Church gaslights and lies to its congregations, real people with real issues need help from a pastor who stands on biblical principles. People's lives are falling apart. They're getting divorced. They're killing themselves. They're leaving the church. They're abandoning the church. They're raising their children in poor ways. There's a million different things that are happening. And it's because of their own sin, for sure. People have their own sin. But it's also because we have a church here in Madison that is more fixated and obsessed with its own image than it is with the truth. They're not interested in the truth. People can fall by the wayside. They can fall off. Their lives can go out of control. They can be, they can become spiritual bastards. They can leave the church. They can become, divorce, whatever. They can kill themselves. And that's been literally a case at High Point Church where a person that I know very closely, I knew, shot himself in the head. And there were things that High Point Church definitely could have done to prevent that, and they didn't. And they didn't care afterwards either. That has happened. That's probably happening all over the country, and I'm not going to say that High Point's some uniquely bad church, but these are real. There are real consequences to bad leadership, and that's why I'm doing this. So there are a couple main reasons why I'm doing this podcast. The church is riddled with turmoil, and there's a lot of lying. There's a lot of secretive things happening, and there's a lot of bullying. And I hate using that terminology. I'm being bullied. No, there's real bullying of women, which is kind of disgusting to me. And I think it's just gross what certain people, women against women, men against women, like it's bad. The bullying and the slander and the ad hominem attacks and whatever. And I've been a recipient of those attacks, and I don't really care. I mean, I kind of stand by the Charles Spurgeon. Like, he had a quote that was like, he said, what did he say? He said, don't get too upset when people revile you and say terrible things about you. You're definitely worse than they think that you are. And I agree with, some of the things that have been said about me or whatever, like I'm, brash and loud and annoying. And there's probably a bunch of truth to that. So I'm not even going to defend myself because that's not really what this is about. And I don't really care to defend myself. But attacking women in the church, belittling people publicly, treating people like they're idiots, that they can't make any decisions on their own, that they need overlords and thought police to tell them what they can think and say. That's when I start to get pissed off in general. It definitely pisses me off when a church is doing that. And it should piss you off because it's evil and it's wrong. And actually, Jesus hates that sort of stuff, which is why his main enemies were the Pharisees, if you read the Gospels. So, and that's what they did. They did that stuff all the time. They were the gatekeeper. They held the truth and you didn't. So you obey what they say and you shut your mouth. And that's generally how these people work. in religious institutions and political institutions. That's how the left work. We get into like the politics of it, but the left, like their strategy for a long time was just shut up, just telling people to shut their mouth. You're a racist. And then everybody just shut up. And like, that's how they dealt with stuff. That's how they argued. You're a racist. Okay. The end. And that's not really how you make arguments. That's not how you treat people. You have to make substantive arguments. Maybe somebody is a racist, and that's fine. You can call them that, I guess. But maybe follow it up with a couple of reasons why. Whatever. So I don't like that stuff. So here's the... I'll get started. April 2nd, 2023, I met with two elders. At the time, they were elders. I don't think they're elders anymore. Luke Hershey, who at the time was the chair of the elder board, and Matt Raleigh, about two things. One of those things I won't mention in this podcast because it's not that important. And the other thing is that I was skeptical of Nic and his relationships on staff with female coworkers and subordinates. And so I told the elders that Nic seemed to have very close emotional relationships with particular women, and that I was feeling more and more uncomfortable about his moral stability as a pastor. I'd been in conversations where between Nic and particular women where there was like flirting and just sort of playful fun and openness and a lot of very weird, there's favoritism showed to particular people. And we'll get into all that as we go forward. And I just felt weird about it. And I went to the elders as I thought that's what you should do if things are happening like that, whatever. And they had told me that I'm not the first person to turn Nic in to the elder board for this accusation. They've actually heard this multiple times. And I was a little bit surprised to hear that. Maybe at the time I was, maybe I wasn't, I don't know, but I didn't know that it was like multiple times. So anyway, I thought, okay, they're going to take care of it. They're going to talk to him. Maybe he'll go on like a sabbatical. This is like after 2020. I thought for a long time he should have been on like a 6-month sabbatical. He should have taken a break. There's some personal things that were happening in his family that were devastating for him. I said, like, I thought they would just be like, Nic, obviously you're not healthy right now. Let's just put you on sabbatical or something. This is like multiple complaints. We'll look into it while you go on sabbatical. They didn't do that. I never heard anything actually after that. I never had a follow-up from anybody about either of the two things that I mentioned to those elders. Never, not one time. Neither of those people, neither of those elders ever reach out to me again for a follow-up. So the following summer leading into fall, my wife and I had stopped attending High Point Church and had gotten word from a staffer, Erin Hesse, who at the time was the executive assistant to Nic Gibson, that she had brought accusations about Nic into the elder board with almost identical claims that I had made previously that year about inappropriate emotional/favoritism relationships with particular women on staff. I had known that she had done this. We gotten word way later. We were sort of out of High Point, and so we got word later on. Our family had moved in October of 2023 further away from Madison, and we hadn't been attending High Point Church for several months, and so our thought was that we'll just let God deal with this, and we'll invest in our new church, our new family, and our new home. So much of the information that we gained would come to us about 6 months later, 6 months down the road. And so on June 7th of 2024, my wife met with Erin Hesse, and Erin updated her on what was going on from her perspective at High Point Church as a result of her turning Nic into the elder board on certain accusations previously mentioned. Nic gave her a letter. So she made these accusations, and this was sort of the response to that. Nic gave her a letter of expectations as a discipline to her that, among many things, said, one, that she was not allowed to go directly to the elders to talk about anything without approval from Erin Raleigh, Matt Raleigh's wife. That was one of the elders at the time, Matt Raleigh. So she can't talk to the elder board anymore. Now she has to go through an elder's wife before she can have permission to talk to the elder board that she's technically in charge of as a congregant of the church. But whatever, she's not allowed to anymore. I'll try to keep my commentary to a minimum, but she's not allowed to. So that was one of multiple things. Two is that she was not allowed to talk to anybody about what was going on at High Point Church, and that doing so was a fireable offense. They threatened to fire her if she talks to anybody about what was actually happening behind closed doors, including this list of things that she had received from Nic on what she is allowed to do and say and not allowed to do and say. Another result, I'm not sure if this was in Nic's expectations, was that Erin was not allowed to participate in the mentoring ministry, the women's mentoring ministry, and was excluded from it by whomever was running it at the time. We don't remember who was running it. Could have been Nic's wife because she was for a while. It could have not been. I don't know. But at the time, she was not allowed to participate at all in the women's mentoring ministry. She's extremely dangerous. Of course, she was breaking rule number 2 by talking to my wife about all of this. Like, she's not supposed to tell anybody. She came to our house and told us everything. So, and I want to say it's worth noting here that when my wife and Aaron came back to the house that day, they were like taking a walk around town or something like that. After they had gotten back, Aaron and I got into a heated argument in which I was telling her that she needed to go public with this stuff. This is ridiculous. And you need to tell people what's happening in the ridiculous list of rules that that Nic and the elders had approved in this whole thing. Like, you need to do something about this. You need to tell people because this is wrong. This is evil. They're bullying you and they're manipulating you and they're telling you to shut your mouth and not talk. And that you have to go through all these weird channels to get to the elder board that is supposed to be pastoring you and taking care of you. And we got into a heated argument, a very heated argument, to the point where I told her to leave my house, to get out of my house. If you don't want to do the right thing, if you don't want to tell the truth, get out of my house. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Because at some point it becomes just gossip and slander. And I don't want to have anything to do with that. If we're going to do something about it, let's do something. If we're not, then shut up. Basically, I was trying harsh, but that's sort of my reaction. Like, why are we just coming to everybody's house? Everybody's talking behind closed doors and spreading all this stuff. Like, let's just get to the bottom of it. Now let's back up to the winter of 2023 leading into 2024, in which High Point Church is voting on their decision to receive Monona Oaks Church building, which had been given to them by Monona Oaks Church as it closed their doors. Nic was very open about allowing End Times Ministries International, the church previously mentioned, to have full use of this space for worship services and other ministry. They meet there several times a week. At that point, Nic was vague about End Times Ministries, who they are and what they believe. It was very vague at the point. But before the final vote, at the end of February, on February 4th, 2024, High Point held a town hall meeting in which congregants could ask the elders and pastors questions about taking on another church building and all the responsibilities and potential liabilities that could come with it. In this meeting, which is linked in the description as Monona Oaks Town Hall, it's like the name of the podcast. The link is in the description. One congregant, a woman, asked the only good question. And I'm dead serious when I say this is the only good question. This is like a 2-hour thing. And 99% of the conversation was about money. Money. That's all these people could think about. Like, we're taking on a building. What about the money? Money. It's like, remember what Jesus talked about all the time. He talked about money all the time, right? He was like, we can't go to the next town because we need to look at the finances. That's what they talked about the whole time. So there's one woman who asked a wonderful question, and the only good question, like the only question related to like the spiritual health of the church and should we actually be doing something like this? And so we're going to listen to that right now. So I'll play that right now.
My question relates to the emotional and spiritual health of the leaders guiding our congregation through this phase of growth. I don't need any more clarification on strategy, vision, planning, staff, and capacity surrounding this opportunity, but I'm wondering if there's anything we're turning a blind eye to in light of this being too big an opportunity to pass up. So, do you have any reservations about the trustworthiness or integrity of our pastors? Do you have any reservations about the relational dynamic between our pastors and their staff and or elders?
Okay. So I just want to say to the person who asked that question, I commend you. That is a wonderful question. It's the only good question. Thank you for asking that question. It's the only good question. Please go back and listen to the whole thing. It is terrible question after stupid question after money question after money question after money question. It's all about money. That's all these people care about. It was insane. I've never heard anything like it. It was like, we're going to bring on all these buildings. What about the money? What about your like leaders? Like what about like what the point of the church is? It's not an economic system. It's not like an enterprise. You're not building an enterprise. You're not building a huge company. You're supposed to be building people's faith. So let's talk about faith in Jesus. She was the only one who wanted to talk about that. So good on her. Thank you for asking that. Now, I want to just be specific about what this woman is asking. She's asking if the staff dynamics are healthy enough in all of these different directions to take on the responsibility of another building. It's a good question. We have one building already. We've got people on staff. We have people that go to this church. are we really ready to bring another building on to another campus or something like that? Are we going to, like, there was some questions as to exactly what it would be for. Everybody kind of knew. Nic was kind of clear. It's going to be for End Times, but like, should we be doing that? Are we going to help pay for salaries? Like, what is this? Are we going to, because that's property taxes. I actually don't know how that all works. I guess the churches are usually tax exempt in a lot of ways. So anyways, but there were financial burdens, particular ones that came with this. And that plays a role in it. But they're also like, do we have the spiritual capacity? Do we have pastors who are willing to go over there and set this thing up? And it's on the east side and we're on the west side, and there's different people and different cultures and different things, whatever. And that doesn't, you don't need to like study the culture to make a gospel impact. That's all BS. I'm just saying that there are good questions related to the spiritual health and to the theological health of your pastorate. And can they handle taking another building on? Is it even worth taking a building on? Like, why would we do this to begin with? Is the only reason to do it is to give it to another church? Okay, is that a good reason? Obviously not, because that church supports murdering babies. So why are we doing this? And is it good enough? Are the pastors in good enough standing with God? And is the staff in good enough standing with God to be able to take on a whole other responsibility on the other side of the city? Wonderful question. So I'll just stop like right now. And I just want you to take a minute, whoever's listening to this, I want you to ask yourself, based on the limited information that I've already given you on this podcast, what would your answer to that question be? Do you think that High Point Church and their leadership and their staff are in the right place to be taking on another building based off of her question? How would you answer that question? I know how I would answer that question. I would answer that question like, yeah, probably not, actually. We've had multiple people come to us with the same accusations of Nic. We haven't done a thorough investigation. And there's some other things too, and I'm going to get into these in a minute. But even just based on what I've already said, there's major accusations being made at the senior pastor. They haven't been investigated. They haven't been looked into. Nobody's been talked to. Now they're bullying a woman into shutting her mouth about things. And we want to bring a whole other building into the situation and like try to build our church enterprise. Is that a good idea? Probably not. That's what I think. Make your own decision on that. But it will reveal the foolishness in your heart, so be careful on how you make that decision. But anyways, they ended up voting yes. And I encourage you to go back and listen to that, because you can listen to the answer. I can't remember who it was from, one of these elders. And I talked about it in the previous podcast a little bit, I think, that I did on High Point. But one of the elders came out and basically like made an equivocation fallacy and was like, yeah, well, does your marriage have problems? And everybody's like, ha ha ha, yeah, we all have marriages with problems. Ha ha ha, that's funny. Yeah, and like that's like the church is like, there's problems in the church. There's always problems, blah, 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 blah. And it was like sort of like, okay, you're not answering the question though. The question was, she didn't ask, does the church have problems? Duh, every church has problems. She asked, are these problems big enough to maybe people in the congregation who are supposed to be voting for this, maybe they should be privy to the information and to the knowledge of what these problems are so that they can make a wise decision as to whether or not they should bring on another church, another building, another responsibility. That was the question. And he answered it with some like frivolous bullying tactic in which he equivocated and made some nonsensical joke at the only woman who asked a good question in this entire thing, and kind of belittled her and mocked her and kind of made her look stupid in front of everybody. And I don't even want to play it. I guess I will play it, but I don't even want to, because it's so reprehensible and so disgusting that somebody would treat a person in their church, a woman in their church who asked the only good question, this way. Fine, I'll play it, whatever.
Do you want to clarify who you mean by you in that question? Are you addressing anybody in particular?
The elders.
Yep.
Assuming the elders have discussed that.
So you're talking about like the relationship between the elders and the pastors, or just?
Yep. Like, do you have any reservations about where the fellow elders, or where the pastors are at spiritually in terms of their integrity, trustworthiness? And then also, do you have any concerns about the relational dynamic between yourselves as elders and the pastors and staff, or the pastors and the staff that serve under them? Does that make sense?
I'll keep playing. I'm going to shut up at some point, but that couldn't have been a more perfect question. It was a wonderful question. It was succinct. It was clear. There was clear guidelines to the question. What do you mean by you? What does you mean? Does it mean me? Does it mean them? What does you mean? What does you mean? What does you mean? What does you mean? That's the question that he's at. What is you? What does you mean? I don't know. Go get a dictionary, bud. Like, you know what you means. You use it all the time. You use the word all the time. You know what it means. Why are you asking that? Immediately to confuse everybody. What do you mean by you? And then she clarifies the elders and the pastors and the people on staff. You know, the people that she was referring to in the first part of the question. Apparently she needs to semantically deliberate and articulate every definition of every word because you is a difficult word to understand. What do you mean by you? Do you mean you as in like the Chinese word, like you as in like them? Or is it you or is it me? Or are you saying you in the third person towards yourself? It's incredibly difficult. Sometimes, and I get it. These are difficult questions to figure out. It's so hard to figure out. So whatever, they belittle her and they mock her right out of the gate. Like you, what does you mean? That's so hard to figure out.
I'll have to think about that question a little bit before I answer it. And I think maybe when Nic gets up, he can answer too.
She says, does that make sense? And the lead elder, that was Luke Hershey, says he's going to need to think about that. He's going to need to think about that. Difficult to think about.
A little bit before I answer it. I think maybe when Nic gets up, he can answer too.
Immediately passing the torch to Nic. And I am commentating on this because this is ridiculous. Oh, I don't know. I'm the leader of the elder board. I don't know. I need to think about that. Nic, come and save me. Come and save me, Nic. Come and save me. This happens all the time at these boards. I'm getting too angry, so go ahead.
I would say that when we voted to put the motion before the church, we voted unanimously for that motion. And like some of the other buildings that we've looked at, there's always debate. There in the board. You can look at our meeting minutes. Like all our meeting minutes are public unless there's a personnel issue or something like that. All our meeting minutes are public. You can go out there, see the discussions, see the disagreement, see the debate back and forth. And yeah, we have disagreements here and there, right? And this opportunity came up very quick, right? So we've had to pull this together. Mike and Nic have been working on it. They've been building relationships. And I am firmly convinced that we should be planting a church, for sure. I thought we should be planting a church as soon as we went to 2 services, which has been how many years, right? So I think that's as Christians, as we grow, that's what we should be looking for. Now, there's other things, you know, Nic kind of mentioned like the staff dynamics or the staff town hall and other areas. There's definitely improvements that we're going to have to do as we grow and get a new campus. As elders, we've read a couple books. There's a book called Multi-Church, Sticky Teams. It talks about how churches grow as they get to certain sizes, as they get to multiple campuses. There's organizational changes that we have to do to keep that healthy, right? And so we're going to be looking at some of those items as we grow and change over time, but those things haven't been finalized at this point. So
take a minute and think about the answer to that question. So this is the lead elder, doesn't answer the question at all in any capacity. He answers on the basis of consensus. He says, she asks a specific question. Are there things in the relational dynamics of this church and the pastors and the elders and the staff, which by the way, you would maybe characterize like a bunch of people turning Nic into the elder board for inappropriate relationships with women as like part of that. She asked this specific question and he says, well, we all agreed to bring this before the church. That's great. Nobody asked that question. They didn't ask, was there a consensus among the elder board to bring this before the church? Because if not, we shouldn't be here right now. She didn't say that. She said, are the dynamics and the relationships healthy on staff and among pastors and elders? Like, is it healthy? Do we have healthy people in charge, holding power in this institution? Do we have healthy people? And he says, we agreed on it. Okay, that's not what they're talking about. That's not what she's asking. That's not the question. She didn't ask it, did you agree on it? And then he gets into like the logistics. It has nothing to do with anything. There's a responsibility. We've got, they're going to have to do some remodeling. And, Nic and Mike, they've been thinking about this a lot. And it's like, that's fine. Those are answers to different questions. Those are not answers to the questions that she is asking. She's asking a very poignant, clear question. You can't answer it. Why can't he answer it? Why can't Luke Hershey, the lead elder at the church, answer a simple question? Is it because he can't? I don't want to make any statements about anybody's cognitive ability. I think that he probably can. I think it's because he doesn't want to, because he actually knows what's going on at the church and he knows what's happening behind closed doors. And so instead of answering the question, throw a couple platitudes. We're building relationships. That's not the question. She didn't say, are you building relationships? He's talking about your already existing relationships on staff. Are those good? Not the new building relationships. She didn't say that. But he knows, oh, we read books. We read 2 books. Great. That's not the question. Did you read books? Did you read Sticky Book or whatever? She didn't ask that. She said, are the relationships healthy between these people? And she was way more poignant than I am right now. And the answer was, we read books and we all agreed, and Nic is thinking about it, and so is Mike. Okay, well, that's all helpful information, I guess. But what about the question that was asked? He doesn't ever give an answer.
I have a way.
I'm going to do something I almost never do, and that's ignore my wife's advice. As I mentioned, I'm your personnel elder too. In addressing the question, do you have questions about your pastor's integrity, or do you have questions about the inner dynamics of staff relationships, relations to the elder board, relations to the pastors, any of the above, all the different lines that go on a diagram? I don't have any concerns about the internal spiritual integrity of our pastoral staff. They're all godly men who love the Lord. How many of you in this room are married? How many of you at any given time, if you think back to your marriage, would always say, wahoo, great? Raise your hands all the time on board. That's what I thought.
We did have somebody married less than 3 months.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. Right. How many of you in the course of that marriage would look at your spouse and go, what did I do? Or the other way, they're looking at you and you know what they're thinking. Right. Been there. Okay. Welcome to your staff. Welcome to your pastors. You know what? Sorry, they're saved by grace and they're sinners. You know what? Your elder board saved by is a sinner too. Your personnel guy is a big sinner. I've spent a lot of my time. I'm an axe grinder and a fault finder. Okay? And I've spent a lot of my time on my knees asking God to help me with that, because there's things that about my pastors that drive me nuts. There's things about some staff that drive me nuts, and there's things about them that I drive them nuts. Okay, true confession. Okay, that doesn't mean it's not real. That doesn't mean we don't love the Lord, and it doesn't mean we're doing God's will. But I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke. It's not all perfect. And it needs to grow, and it needs to change, and it needs to do that. Welcome to every church. At least we know it, and we're trying to work through it. Best answer I got, but I have no question that we're trying to head in the right direction. Amen. Hope that answers.
I think so. I think the other side of this that also comes from Paul is this. I called Paul this week about staff conflict, and I asked him, Paul, I need you to be straight with me and tell me everything that you've heard from our staff that's wrong with me that you think has merit. And he gave me 3 very pointed, painful, and true criticisms that he had gotten from the staff. And at the end of the phone call, I said, thank you. He said, would you pray for me? I said, yes. So yes, there is plenty of, we have high capacity people with lots of opinions on our staff team. And though I think Paul is right, I know of no direct biblical or otherwise moral failings, right, or disqualifying gaps in spirituality. We all have weaknesses that are affecting each other and that are material, real weaknesses that we have to either grow in or help each other in those places and fill in where the other people are weak, and to figure out how that works. The elders have spent an enormous amount of time in this last year working on that. We are in a more positive place than we were 5 months ago, and we have both I and my schedule and some of our elders have on their schedules specific meetings. The elders have been very generous with me about making things available that I need to heal or get better in these transitions, offering counseling, spiritual direction, and leadership consulting where I need it. And so, I just want to lay that out. We've had very frank, very fruitful conversations. We're praying for each other. So I am encouraged at where we're at, but it's not always easy either.
So I won't keep playing it, but they went on and on into different questions. And again, back to money. It was like immediately back to money. The next question was from somebody who was about money. They really kind of blew her off. Later on, a couple of other pastors or elders went back to that question asked by this woman and belittled her, kind of like made the whole equivocation and kind of made it like a big funny joke, because what a stupid question. Why would you even ask that? Why would you ask that? Why aren't you asking money questions, you idiot? Why would you ever ask questions about the spiritual healthy relation, like the health of the spiritual, what am I saying? The health of the relationships of the people on the staff and on the elder board and the pastors. That's such a dumb question. Obviously, everybody's good and nothing bad is happening behind closed doors. You shouldn't be asking that question. That's sort of the implication that they gave. Okay. So they voted yes to acquire Monona Oaks building on February 18th, 2024. In this time, since we've left High Point, since we've left High Point and further on, I've been talking with people from High Point and many other churches, pastors, theologians about the situation and trying to put the pieces together and being very clear about my position on the situation. So I talked to a lot of different people, theologians, pastors, everybody's like, I'm trying to figure this out. Like, what do I do here? And on March 25th, 2024, I received a call from an elder at High Point Church. The elder is Matt Raleigh. Maybe he's finally returning my call. Maybe he's finally not returning my call. Maybe he's finally following up on the accusations that I made a year later. And so Matt Raleigh calls me, in which he informs me that he has heard that I am telling congregants at High Point Church that Nic is having an affair with another woman. He tells me this. And I ask him, where did that information come from? And he said that it came from a couple who my wife and I were friends with at the church, a younger couple, and I'm not going to mention their names because they're not in any public position of leadership, and there's no point in doing that. But I tell Matt that I've never said that, and that I have only said that Nic has had inappropriate emotional relationships with women, and that I've specifically been clear in saying that these relational dynamics or these relationships that he's had are not sexual in any way. I've said that over and over to people. Like, I'm skeptical of his relationships with women. Could they be? I have no idea. We know how emotional stuff works, and we know how people get close, and then whatever. It could go into that, or maybe it has. I don't know. There's too many questions around it because there's no investigation in any of this stuff. But I never said anything like that. I never said there was ever any sexual relationship. I never said that. And so I had a hard time believing that these congregants, these friends of ours, would have said that about me. I did talk to them about High Point and Nic, and I did say that I think he's out on unhealthy relationships with women. And I did say that it was not sexual that I know of, but I did not say anything further than that. And I was like, there's no way that they would just go mischaracterize everything that I'm saying. We know that they haven't, and I'll get to it in a minute, but this conversation went on with this elder for at least an hour. And in it, I made further claims and accusations about Nic and his relationships with women, and certain things that he had said to me about women on his staff that I felt was inappropriate and potentially worth a broader investigation. Again, this is my second time. If they call me, are you saying that Nic's having an affair? No, I didn't say that. And we'll get to that in a minute. But then we talked for an hour or so on the phone, and I'm like, dude, let me just give it all to you, because I didn't tell him everything the first time because I didn't know what to tell him the first time I went to the elder board. And finally, I just said, here's everything. And so a couple of these things. So one of the things that I told them was that there was a situation where Nic and I and my wife were on their front porch of their home, and we were over there all the time. And this was in the days of Optiv. For those of you who know that, I started to try to start a media company that utterly failed drastically, and Nic was a part of it. And so we were on his porch, and we were talking about male-female dynamics and relationships, and like, you know, the closer, really dumb conversations, like, why are we talking about this stuff? But whatever. The sort of like close dynamic that he has with women on his staff. He's got females who are his assistants, and they're like 10, 15 years younger than him. And like, what's that like? And, you know, was that difficult? And he had said to me that there was a time in the years of his ministry at High Point where if one of these women who are on staff had made a sexual advancement at him, that he would not have resisted, that he would have gone along with it. And my wife and I were both there, and we both heard this, And so Nic is going to probably call us liars, and that's okay with me. That doesn't bother me. I'm not making this up for fun. But he said that. And I said, my next question was, well, do you have like an accountability for this? Like, do the elders know? And he said, yeah, the elders know. Okay. So no problem. I guess my thought was at the time, I can see that being a thing where like men work with women younger than them. Maybe they think they're attractive. And at the time I thought this way. Now I'm like, when you get outside of the cesspool that is High Point Church and you meet other people and you know other pastors and you know people who are in far greater positions of authority and power and have more responsibility than Nic will ever have, you realize that you don't say this stuff, and you definitely don't say it to somebody who's 20-some years younger than you, and you don't talk about it publicly, and you just don't do this. Like, you don't do this, and you don't put these people in places, like the people who put women around them who they think are attractive are usually doing it for a purpose. That's what I've learned. And I'm not saying that that's what Nic is doing. I'm saying that that's what I've learned now. But back then I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense, whatever. And I didn't think anything of it. Well, I tell that to Matt Raleigh. Matt said that, and Nic said that the elder board knew about it and that they had, there were certain accountability things set up, and I didn't get into the details. It's not, whatever. They're taking care of it. I don't care. Matt Raleigh said he had never heard that before. And he said that the other elders had never heard of it before either. It was never come up to their attention. And so I was a little shocked when I told him that, because Nic had told me that he had been told by the elders, like, why is that? What is going on here? So he had never, the elders had never been told of that. So then there's the reality that there's a woman named Jill Reese she was on High Point staff for a long time. She's played many different roles. Now she's the Oaks director or something like that. She does like psychological and theological integration, which is impossible, by the way. But Jill Reese had acknowledged that the dynamic between Nic, she had kind of compared like the dynamic between Nic and his assistant as between, sorry, I'm reading my own writing wrong. That Joe Reese had acknowledged the dynamic between Nic and his assistants to my wife and I. To my wife, sorry, that there was this dynamic, and that her job was to like know his mind. And Nic had used language quite often as like his assistants are his muse. And he has definitely used that. And you can ask people if they're going to be honest, they'll tell you that he has, that those women are his muse. And going into like Jill Reese, who was at the time kind of mentoring my wife, should have been the other way around. Now that I look back on it, she had mentioned that to my wife at one point, that the only reason that she was in this relationship with my wife was because she wanted to be closer to her friendship with me. And so she kind of was using my wife. She said that to her, and that my wife has documented all of that and written it down or whatever. And so she said that there's this unhealthy dynamic between Nic and his assistants, between Jill and Nic and these people. And I just told all of this stuff to Matt Raleigh. And there was one thing that I had heard from somebody on staff that during a icebreaker, Nic was asked, in what environment do you work best? And he said in front of the whole staff, well, I work best around a young woman who's my muse, basically. Sort of like a young, I start thinking more creatively around that. And so this is like an ongoing thing, like saying these sorts of things about women. It's very bizarre. And he surrounds himself with a lot of women, and he has a really difficult time with the men on his staff. And that's demonstrable. You can go and talk to the men who used to be on his staff. A lot of them have terrible relationships with him, including myself. I used to be on staff, and there's more than just me though. And I said that I would love to speak with the entire elder board several times, like 100 times. I would love to speak with the elder board. And that I would like a follow-up. I would like to hear back. Like, I made an accusation. Please let me know where this is going to go. Because there's a problem here. Or am I wrong about all of this? So whatever, give me a follow-up. We also discussed Sheila Stubbs, End Time Ministries, that stuff. And Matt said that he would think this stuff over and get it compiled, and that I would hear back. And so March 26, 2024, the next morning, Nic texts me and he says, quote, "Looks like we should meet up." And I was like, okay, why is that? I just talked to the elder. Did he just talk to everybody else about this? He talked to Nic about it already. Seems like within 12 hours, Nic already knows everything within 12 hours. That's a little bit weird from my perspective. Doesn't take any time to think through this stuff. Just goes and tells the guy that he has to obey. Not knowing whether it was a good idea to go and talk with him, given that I just shared this information with Matt Raleigh and not aware of the elders' process for these things, I texted and called Matt Raleigh many times. Matt never responded to any attempt at communication. Later claimed that he was sick. Like a week later, he was sick for a whole week. Doesn't know how to text. I was sick. I was blind. My hands didn't work. It was a major sickness to the point where he never checked his phone for like a week and could not respond to anything that I said. So sick, whatever. So anyways, I went to the meeting with Nic, and Nic made drastic claims in this meeting. We argued for like 3 hours. But I'm not going to go into those details because that's just he said, she said. And a lot of this is just he said, she said, but you'll see where this goes. One thing that he did say in that conversation was that Tom Flaherty, the senior pastor, head pastor at City Church, who I had previously had a good relationship with, told him that I don't submit to authority. He kind of threw that in my face because he knows that I had a good relationship with with Tom, and he knew that he thought that if he threw that at me, that I would be thrown off guard. Like, oh yeah, and Tom also thinks this about you, and he's also telling people this about you, and you're also, he thinks badly about you, and he talks behind your back, and that was sort of the tone and emphasis that he put on this. And again, I'm confused. You got to remember, I'm like in my early 20s, like I still kind of am. I'm 26, so I'm like, what is all of this? What does this all mean? And the next day I called Tom and I was like, dude, what's up with this? Like, did you tell these people I don't submit to authority? I have all these issues. And it's actually demonstrably not true that I don't submit to authority. That's an objective fact. I have submitted to the elder board at High Point on multiple occasions in my life. So that's not true at all. And I called him and I was just like, what's going on? And Tom said that Mike Beresford, who's the associate pastor to Nic, had called Tom thinking that we were going to Tom's church and thought that, even though at the time we didn't. And so he called Tom, he was like thinking that we were going to Tom's church. And Mike wanted to stop me from telling people to stop going to High Point Church, because I would tell people all the time who asked, like, what's going on at High Point Church? They would say, what's going on at High Point Church? I'd say, you should stop going there, and here's like 50 reasons why. And he didn't like that. Can't do that. That's bad. And so Tom told Mike, and this is what Tom said to me, that, and maybe Tom's lying, I doubt it. I think he's fairly sincere in these sorts of things. He told Mike, Andy doesn't play church politics, to which Mike told Nic, or Nic took that and twisted it, but I'm pretty sure Mike told Nic, because Mike is a compulsive liar, and we'll learn this more as this goes on. Mike told Nic that Tom said that I don't submit to authority. So I think Nic probably, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here and say that, pin this on Mike, that Nic probably just thought like that's what Tom said or whatever. And so that happened, and it's like, okay, well, why is Mike lying about this stuff? And this is all very weird. Again, this is all just because I made an accusation that I would like to get clarity on about things that Nic had told me that were incredibly inappropriate and wrong and shouldn't be said to anybody, much less a 20-some-year-old at your church. You shouldn't be saying these things. He also did say in the car one time with another person that there's no woman that he couldn't have sex with in our congregation because of his authority and status and all of these things. He said that as we were going to work on we cut down trees together. He had a company, I don't know if he still does, where he cuts trees down on the side. And I went with him. And he said that in the car with another kid that was in the car as well. And so in the week following, these friends of ours that Matt Raleigh referenced shared that they had gotten a phone call from Mike Beresford saying that they shouldn't listen to Andy and that he's lying about everything. So I kind of called, I was like, what is going on? Did you say this? They're like, here's what happened. Mike called us, kind of went off on you, kind of slandered you, trashed your character, said a bunch of terrible things about you, which again, I don't care. Like, that's always a tactic, and it's easy, and you can do that forever. And you can ignore the substance of what I'm saying and try to get around it, but it doesn't bother me. People say bad things about everybody, and it's like, I don't care, whatever. And they told me that they specifically told Mike that I said that Nic had inappropriate relationships with women, but non-sexual relationships. And so that goes back to that earlier conversation about these people, these congregants, these friends who, when I got the call from Matt saying that I had claimed that Nic had affairs when I didn't, it was coming from Mike taking the words of two congregants that we had talked to, and which I had said to them, Nic has inappropriate relationships with women that are non-sexual, and they told that to Mike, and Mike went and told that to Matt, but he twisted it and said that Andy's telling people that Nic is having affairs. Okay, so that's like the second time Mike's lying about some 20-year-old, which is like, that's your associate pastor. Okay. Good for you, Mike, who's like not qualified for the pastorate in a million other ways. So this is like the lowest of his problems. In this time frame, I sent photos of Sheila Stubbs' press releases promoting and celebrating Planned Parenthood and progressive anti-biblical ideology to Nic. I also sent these to another person who responded that he would send them to Luke Hershey, the lead elder, okay? Another person in the congregation also emailed Aaron Hesse at the time, indicating that she would like to speak to an elder about the partnership with End Times Ministries. An email exchange followed with Frank Pekovich, who I think was an elder at the time. This congregant followed up with Frank Pekovich, who said that he would bring her concerns to the elders to be discussed at the elder board meeting. He responded that the issue was discussed on May 7th, on the May 7th meeting. Okay. So another person had brought issues about End Times Ministries to the elders, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. On June 21st, 2024, we brought dinner over to a couple of friends from the church who had just had their baby from High Point Church. We weren't going there, but we were still talking with these people. We brought dinner there, and I stated my position on Sheila Stubbs and End Times Ministries. The next day, this person from the church, who was a prominent person in the church, who I told this person I wouldn't mention their name, called me to just tell me that he fully supports Nic and he has no doubt about parenting or partnering. I'm like dyslexic or something. Partnering with a church whose heretical leadership advocates for abortion, homosexuality, transgenderism, and celebrates Planned Parenthood. On July 12th, 2024, is when I released the Optiv Network is Changing podcast. So all of this had led up to that, and I finally released the podcast. Now, I've been meeting with Tom Flaherty from City Church, the senior pastor at City Church, in the midst of all of these things, though I didn't continue getting together with him, so I kind of stopped at one point. And I don't have the text message to remember on what date he told me this, but Tom Flaherty had told me that he had been consulted by High Point Church and by the elders during this whole quote-unquote investigation about Nic, and that they said that if there was one more accusation brought against Nic regarding his relationships with females on staff, they would fire him. And this is prior, maybe even to my accusation, the first one that I made. So there have been two other, three total accusations from me and one from Aaron Hesse, and they had said prior to that if there's one more accusation, you're fired. And there were multiple, and he wasn't fired, and nothing was done about it, and nobody knows. And that's what Tom Flaherty said. So he can decide whether or not he wants to clarify that. On July 31st, 2024, I had a phone call with Nic. The night before the podcast was released from Nic, called Gracious Unity Amidst Conflict. It's their most popular podcast. You're welcome, Nic. I listened to it because I had gotten access to it before it came out, and I called Nic that night. I made a 2-hour-long phone call, and it was one of the worst phone calls of my life, and he made a bunch of crazy arguments about how he excused Sheila Stubbs' behavior by stating that biblical figures like Daniel probably sinned in severe ways in order to, quote, serve God in politics, and claimed that Sheila Stubbs is like Obadiah, who defied the government in honor of God. It's laughable, but which is utterly backwards. Sheila defies God in honor of a secular God-hating Democratic Party. She advocates for murdering children and celebrates when Planned Parenthood can continue doing so. This is certainly not like Obadiah, who protected God's prophets from death. Sheila delivers little babies over to the wiles of the devil for whatever power she can gain. Nic also denies that he told me and my wife on his porch the year and a half or so prior, all those things. But if anyone wants to hear more of that exchange. I guess I can get into that in a different podcast because there's more evidence there that's not good. But I probably won't do that. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And well, he claimed that he didn't tell me that, but then later on, he kind of claimed that he told the elders that he did tell me that, but it was for spiritual maturity, that he was trying to help me spiritually mature. So he told me something that wasn't like totally true or something like that. So he switched his story on that multiple times. August 1st, 2024, Engage and Equip Gracious Unity podcast with Nic Gibson and Nicole Kyle is released. Nicole Kyle, sort of, I don't know how to explain Nicole Kyle. If you think of a woman millennial, that's Nicole. Just platitudes, kind of wannabe like major church rock star. I don't even know how to explain it. Just like kind of a worship leader lady who is just going to do whatever the pastor says. So in that podcast, she made light of the whole thing, trivialized it, kind of mocked the whole thing, acted like it was all funny and it was a joke. And that's good for Nicole. I'm glad that she did that. And I hope that way of viewing serious topics is working for her in her life. Nic called me a half-cocked liar. He called me half-cocked. He called me a liar. Nic texted me the day before recording the podcast, saying that they'd be doing an episode in response to my podcast, which is how I know it was about me. So they don't mention my name in the podcast, but Nic told me that it was about me. And so it was. And I have those text messages. Okay. So further, I had emailed with Monte Netter. So at this point, when I started emailing with Monte Netter, Monte is the lead of the elder board. So things have kind of shifted in a lot of other ways. And I'm actually just going to read through those emails because I have them here. And the first one takes place on July 18th. So let's look back at what the date was for when that podcast came out, August 1st. So that podcast came out August 1st. My podcast had come out before that. And on when did that come out? July 12th. So the next day after I released my episode, sorry, not the next day, 6 days later, Monte Netter emailed me. He's a leader of the elder board at the time. I don't know if he still is, but he's involved. He says, Andy, I'm writing to you in regard to your recent podcast in which you discussed the End Times Church / High Point Church partnership. To be clear, I, along with other elders, agree completely with you regarding the sinfulness of abortion, gay marriage, and trans medicine, etc. I also share your conviction on complementarianism in the church. While I disagree with your conclusions on how to prudently apply these convictions to partnerships with another church, I appreciate your firm convictions. But I'm not writing to disagree or debate. By the way, as I read this, you decide whether or not he wants to disagree and debate with me. I am writing to you because I am concerned about the way that you characterize the High Point elders. So who cares about the killing baby stuff? It's about me. It's about my image. How could you characterize me this way? On a few occasions, you say that you made your position clear to them, and you also allude to a number of individuals that you claim spoke to the elders. I have been serving as an elder for 13 months now. Please correct me if I'm missing something. If, for example, you or any of these others met with the elders prior to my service. But in my 13 months of service, neither you nor any other person has talked to the elders, and we have open meetings with guests regularly, nor have I received a single piece of communication from you or any other individual. To be fair, I have indirectly heard of your concerns as well as the concerns of two other individuals. I want to assume the best and that I am missing something, but the prima facie, I'm not good at these Latin terms, prima facie, whatever, you know what that means. Look it up in a dictionary. The evidence seems to indicate the use of some exaggerated language and or direct falsehoods. This is going to sound self-serving. It does. But I would encourage you to be more cautious and circumspect in your criticism of Christ's church. Okay. Interesting characterization of what their church is. And those he calls to shepherd his flock. At the very least, you should be certain you are speaking the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Better yet, you should follow Christ's advice on seeking reconciliation or even having a conversation before engaging in self-assured public criticism. By the way, I spent years trying to have a conversation with elders, and no one would talk to me. I told the elders, I told Matt Raleigh, I want to talk to the elder board. They wouldn't get back to me multiple times. So, okay, whatever. I get this email out of nowhere, and I'm kind of pissed off. and I'll read my response. And I'm not justifying anything that I say. I haven't read this in a while, so we'll see if this is any good. Said Monte, disconnecting conviction. I get right into it. Disconnecting conviction from action is reprehensible and illogical theology. We can discuss this further if you want to. I would encourage you to read 1 Corinthians chapter 5, in which it says, and this is 1 Corinthians 5, 3 through 13. By the way, you have to ask yourself, how much scripture are they quoting in all of this stuff? Because that church, Nic, the elders, they never quote scripture as the basis for their arguments for why they're making the decisions that they make. They don't ever do it, especially in regards to these things. So 1 Corinthians 5, 3 through 13 says, for though absent in body, I am present in spirit, and as if present, I have already pronounced judgment on the one who did such a thing. When you are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and my spirit is present with the power of our Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy and swindlers or idolaters, since you would need to go out of the world. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge? God judges those outside. Purge the evil persons from among you. That's the ESV version. Very important. That's a really important passage, but I'll keep reading. This is clear. This is a clear and forthright biblical command that goes against your cowardly and anti-Christian, quote, and I'm quoting him, I, along with other elders, agree completely with you regarding the sinfulness of abortion, gay marriage, and trans medicine, etc. I also share your conviction on complementarianism in the church, while I disagree with your conclusions on how to prudently apply these convictions to partnership with another church, unquote. And I said, let me be very clear. You do not disagree with my convictions, nor my applications. You disagree with Scripture itself when you sit at the table and partner with apostate and baby-murdering liberal sycophants. I can provide many, many more verses on this in the New Testament and Old Testament if you would like. That said, since High Point Church seems to have major communication problems, I can let you in on some information that you, as the head of the elder board, should know. I'm not going to mention this person's name, but a woman sent clear emails to the elder board within the last couple of months pertaining to High Point Church and End Times Ministries. Aaron Hesse was in on those email threads. You can ask her to see those emails, or I can forward you a copy if needed. I have those. I have talked to Nic, an elder, and Matt Raleigh on the phone about many, many issues regarding Nic, High Point Church, End Times Ministries, staff dynamics, Nic's inappropriate comments made to me about other women, etc. I'm not going to mention this other name too because he's on staff, but it doesn't really matter. This other person, a comms person at your church, at High Point Church, has mentioned that emails have come through the comms department from congregants within the church frustrated with the issue of partnering with End Times Ministries. I received a text just this last week from another congregant of High Point Church, I won't mention the name unless it becomes necessary, in which he explained that he talked to High Point Church leadership about the partnership. I could keep going, but this may be a helpful start. High Point Church's communication problems are only indicative of the deeper problems at play. But just because you haven't seen or heard frustrations from your own congregants doesn't mean that they don't exist. That means that you're out of the loop and failing in your duties as an elder to shepherd the flock. Before you begin to make accusations about my language towards High Point Church and its apostate, non-biblical support of homosexuality, transgenderism, and murdering of children in function, be sure to have your ducks in a row and your facts straight. Reconciliation can only be made in accordance with orthodoxy and orthopraxy, neither of which High Point Church maintains at this current moment. You, the staff at High Point Church, and the rest of the elders ought to be ashamed of yourselves and your deception and denials of God's moral and explicit law. My aim is the aim of Christ, to call sinners to repentance and alignment with His word, In this case, the quote-unquote sinners would be you and High Point Church. Let me know if you want to continue this conversation in more depth. I'm happy to. Thanks. So he responds. That was July 18th. He responds, let's just see. That day, no. July. And then I said this the same day. I did a follow-up. I said, I will add, I am free to discuss this further in person or on the phone tonight, tomorrow, this weekend, next week, and mostly anytime going forward. If you are seriously interested in figuring out what is happening at your church, supposedly behind your own back, I am gladly willing to help and give you information. But if the main goal of your email was to intimidate me into not talking about sins your church is committing, I would encourage you to consider a new hobby that isn't related to linguistic manipulation and intimidation of a 24-year-old podcaster. Just let me know. So he responds that day. He says, Andy, I am very sorry that you took my email the way that you did. It's my fault. Now it's my fault. I took his email wrong. I have no desire to intimidate, I think he said intimate, but intimidate you or anyone else. That being said, I respectfully decline your invitation for further discussion. Okay. And I said, Monte, very sad and passive. I hope you and High Point Church can come to repentance soon. I will continue praying for the elders, staff, and congregation you willingly and knowingly lead astray. For now, as Jude commands Christians to say in dealing with situations like this, the Lord rebuke you. Okay, blah, blah, blah. You think that that's the end of it? Then I said the next day on the 19th, Monte, I wanted to send you some objective evidence so that we can have some documentation through email related to the claims that I made in my email and my podcast. Attached is a screenshot of 2 emails, one from the woman congregant to Frank Pekovich and the other from Frank Pekovich to the woman congregant. Frank Pekovich is an elder at High Point Church, and this email exchange between Frank and the woman the congregant woman happened on May 7th of this year, about 2 months ago. In the email, Frank Pekovich tells the woman, quote, I'm sorry for not getting back to you sooner. We did discuss this issue at the 5-7 meeting, and it is something we are concerned about. We all thought the next best step is for Nic to talk with the leaders of the End Times Ministries to make sure that we have the right understanding first. Okay, all right. Weird thing to say because these are public documents. You can just look online. You can see what they've supported online. It's pretty obvious, but whatever, you can go talk to them. So according to Frank Pekovich, again, an elder at High Point Church, a meeting about concerns regarding End Times Ministries actually took place on May 7th, 2024. Frank's email makes sense because on May 30th, Pastor Nic did a podcast on Engage and Equip addressing questions from congregants on this exact issue. The episode is number 350 in case you missed it. If this is true, which I am assuming Frank did not lie, then your statement to me via email yesterday in which you said, quote, I have been serving as an elder for 13 months now. Please correct me if I am missing something. If, for example, you or any of these others met with the elders prior to my service, but in my 13 months of service, neither you nor any other person has talked to the elders, and we have open meetings with guests regularly, nor have I received a single piece of communication from you or any other individual. To be fair, I have indirectly heard of your concerns, as well as the concerns of 2 other individuals. I want to assume the best and that I am missing something, but the evidence seems to indicate the use of some exaggerated language and or direct falsehoods, unquote. So that's what he said to me. I said, there is a couple of things that could be true here, and I will lay them out here. 1, Frank Pekovich lied to the female congregant about the elders at High Point Church discussing concerns with End Times Ministries. 2, you lied to me yesterday saying that, quote, any other person has talked with the elders and we have open meetings with guests regularly, nor have I received a single piece of communication from you or any other individual, unquote. And I did 2A. It's important to know that if Frank did bring these concerns to the elder board on May 7th, 2 months ago, then you would have been there to receive a single, probably multiple pieces of communication on the subject. 3, High Point Church Elder Board has a major communication issue, and somehow, while you were in this meeting, you misunderstood what you were hearing or what you were having a conversation about about End Times Ministries and concerns brought forth by congregants, highly unlikely unless there's other cognitive issues at play. For the fourth option, you may have not been at the meeting. You'll have to either confirm or deny that. I would love to add that both Aaron Hesse and Luke Hershey, an elder, were both in these email threads. All that said, you should be careful going forward if you're going to make statements calling me a liar or exaggerator. I will stand by the fact that in my podcast and in my emails, I never lied one time. You, as of right now, have the burden of proof to show that you were in fact correct about the statement that you don't know of anyone, including me, that has talked to the elders or that you have not received a single piece of communication from you or any other individual, from me or any other individual, because according to these email threads, you are a liar or have been deceived yourself in some way, shape, or form. Again, I can continue to provide objective evidence for the claims on the podcast if you would like. Your elder board's incompetency cannot be placed on me for calling it out. I would love an apology for your accusing me of saying quote unquote falsehoods and quote unquote exaggerating my language on the podcast, though I'm not entirely confident in the maturity of your elder board, including yourself, and the ability to see the truth and align yourself with it when necessary. I will always be open to more discussion and will be willing to receive an apology at any time. God bless, Andy Schmitt. Look, I go a little hard on these things, but whatever. Monte responds. He responds. It's a miracle. He says this, and I did attach in that email the threads of emails that I'm referring to, and I have those attachments. He said, "Hi, Andy. Thank you for this clarification." So now he wants to talk. Before this, he didn't want to talk. Now he wants to talk. It is helpful for me to get a better idea of where you are coming from. I'd like for us to have a more fruitful conversation, and I fear that we are talking past each other right now. I don't think we are, personally, but for some reason he thinks that we're talking past each other. But he says, italicized, "This is my fault." He takes responsibility. He says, "This is my fault. We're talking past each other. It's my fault." Okay, fine. He said, "I'd like to try to move forward, towards a less combative tone. To that end, let me begin by apologizing. I am sorry for my poor communication. I addressed my concerns poorly. I came across in a way I did not intend, and I've created an exchange that is unnecessarily combative and unfruitful. Please forgive me." He underlined that. Please forgive me. Okay, sorry. There's so many things wrong with this fake apology. It's like, I didn't ask you to apologize for any of these things. I told you to apologize for calling me an exaggerator and a liar and saying that whatever, but okay. Please forgive me. Let me try to clarify where I was coming from. My perception could be off, but when I listened to your podcast, it was my understanding that you were claiming that you and others had talked, quote, not communicated. That's literally what he says, that we had talked, not communicated. What the hell do you think communication is? I'm sorry. What is communication? By the way, look at, like, we get into like the deep weeds of semantics, and I'm going to read a Bible verse at the end we'll tie it together, but it's like talking isn't communication. Okay. Others had talked to the elders, talked, not communicated to the elders, not just an elder or two, but to the whole board, clearly on a quote, on a italicized number of occasions. The reason I disagreed with what I took to be your claim is that no one communicated directly to me about this issue via email, phone, or in person. Based on your last email, I understand that you are not claiming this. If I understand you correctly, I think you are claiming the same communication that I had in mind when I wrote that I, quote, have indirectly heard of your concerns as well as the concerns of two other individuals. One of them was the email this woman from the congregation sent that you attached. And you are correct. We did discuss this in May. I agree with this. So they did do that. So there was communication past. Now, we're going to get into a conversation. It's going to get boring, but it's incredibly important about what the word communication means, because it's so hard to understand these things. And just look at the postmodern rhetorical tactics that are used in this. You're smart enough to do that. So he says, it may be helpful for us to try to figure out where we agree and disagree. One, I think that we agree in terms of what communication has happened. You have had communications with Nick, the woman from the congregation with Frank, and the elders have discussed these, but there has not been any direct communication from you to the elder board or from any other individual to the elder board as a whole. Is that fair? No, but whatever. I respond. 2, I disagree with the way you characterize the communication you had with the elder board on your podcast. I continue to maintain that you made it sound like there was more and clearer communication than there was in fact. However, to be fair, this is a matter of perception, and I'm willing to concede I may be wrong here. It's not a matter of perception. It's written documentation. I have it on my computer. It's not a matter of perception. It's not like, oh, you perceive the A as a G. No, it's like there's a written communication. Whatever. I'll keep going. 3, there is obvious disagreement about if High Point should partner with End Times or not. You think we should not. I am in support of the partnership we have. This is probably the most substantial disagreement, right? Maybe. 4, this last one is not so much a disagreement as it is an issue of concern for you, but it is something like, and then he says, you are concerned about Nic and staff dynamics, especially as they relate to women. Is that fair? So it's sort of all these issues combined. Okay. So it says, Andy, to be clear, I've not said anything public, nor have I talked to any other elders or pastors about this. I meant what I wrote initially, albeit poorly, that I would encourage you to be more cautious and circumspect in your criticism. I continue to have this concern. I have never met you, but in short order, you have accused me of being, quote, cowardly and anti-Christian. Yes, I have. Quote, failing in my duties as an elder to shepherd the flock. Yes, I have. And incompetency in my role, potential, quote, linguistic manipulation and intimidation, quote, being passive. You have made an allusion to me as needing to be rebuked like Satan, correct? And question my maturity. 100%. That's like the truest thing that he said on this. I did say all those things because they're true. This is hard to convey over email, but please hear me. I am not against you. You certainly are against me. You certainly are, because you disagree with everything that I'm saying. I disagree with you. I'm not against you, but I'm against you. That's brilliant. I disagree with you and you with me about this partnership, but I think we can do that in a way that is productive and that honors the Lord. I don't know. We'll see. I want to end by reiterating this conversation has been debilitated by an unnecessary combative tone, and I take full responsibility for that. He took full responsibility for the combative tone. I was supposed to say on the record right now, I also take full responsibility for that. I'm totally combative, as I should be, because what they're doing is evil, and the tone should be combative. Why are we partnering with these people? Why is Nic able to do and say all these things and nobody cares? There should be some combativeness in that. That's like the proper place for combativeness. So he takes responsibility for that. I again do ask your pardon. I hope you will receive this email charitably and hear it in the best possible tone, and that our future interactions and communication will be more respectful and fruitful. Sincerely, Monte. Okay, so I got that, and then I responded. And so this one's long, but I responded, and it's important to listen to all of this stuff if you're interested in what's actually going on. But I responded to him saying this. Monte, I appreciate the halfway apology, though you still have not apologized for calling me a liar, the thing that I think you need to apologize for. Your response is nonsensical in many ways. To begin, you claim that, quote, talking and, quote, communicating are not intrinsically connected. This is obviously false. To help you understand what the word communication means, I will provide a definition from Merriam-Webster's dictionary. I thought it was like an agreed upon, like we could agree upon, like Merriam-Webster's is like decent. I mean, it's not the best, but it's decent. As you can see, within the definition of quote-unquote communication is, quote, verbal or written message. Sadly, your point that, quote, no one communicated directly to me about the issue via email, phone, or in person based on your last email, I understand that you are not claiming this. If I understand you correctly, I think you are claiming that the same communication that I had in my mind when I wrote that I have indirectly heard of your concerns as well as the concerns of 2 other individuals, unquote. One of them was the email, this is still within his quote. One of them was in the email that the woman congregant has sent that you attached, and you are correct. We did discuss this in May, and I agree with this, unquote. Okay, so here's my response to that. I said, it is coherent as you cannot arbitrarily define. So this statement that he made is incoherent as you cannot arbitrarily define what direct and indirect communication means. This is postmodern and manipulative rhetoric. A direct communication would include the verbal conversation that the elders had in May about this very topic, and would include the written communication from the woman congregant to Frank Pekovich. I am very confused as to how and why you would try to claim otherwise. I will address the next 4 points one by one. 1, we may agree that communication has taken place, but like I stated above, it seems we have a disagreement over what quote-unquote type, direct or indirect, of communication has taken place. I personally have talked to Matt Raleigh and a year ago, Matt Raleigh and Luke Hershey about many issues pertaining to High Point Church and staff dynamics at the time. The woman in the congregation did communicate directly with the whole elder board through written communication. 2, I'm not interested in a conversation about perception, as I've seen at High Point Church for years. The quote subjectivity arguments are a cop-out to individuals taking full responsibility for their failures. That said, if you concede, then we can move on. 3, I agree that this is where the central argument can be found. I have for months been asking Nic, certain elders, congregants, and anyone who would listen, what biblical basis do you, High Point Church, have for partnering with a church led by apostate and anti-Christian leaders? To this question, I have only received, quote, I disagree with you, unquote, rather than any actual biblical argument condoning this behavior. As I mentioned in the first email I sent to you, 1 Corinthians 5 is one of many verses that states my opinion clear, and I'm happy to engage in theological debate on the meaning of that passage. I can also reference passages from 2 Peter and Jude along with Galatians in the New Testament. Aside from those, I can point to the Old Testament and give examples of syncretism and God's commands against it and how that relates to the modern church. I can keep asking this question, or I will keep asking this question until I get a biblical answer that is in alignment with the Bible, the scriptures. If you point me to Nic's podcast on High Point Church, on why High Point Church is partnering with End Time Ministries, I will reject it for a couple of reasons. One being, Nic does not give a biblical argument using scripture. He gives a philosophical argument using scriptural terminology, like doctrine and ethics and gospel, but not scriptural passages and verses. 2, Nic logically contradicts himself in claiming that belief in the gospel produces true doctrine, which produces true ethical living. This is good and true. And that if your ethics are not in alignment with doctrine, you don't actually believe in the gospel. That is also true. After that, he says that Sheila Stubbs' ethics are not in alignment with biblical doctrine, but that they are in alignment with the gospel. This claim completely contradicts his own correct claim in the beginning. Again, I want scripture, not Nic's incoherent philosophy that excuses neo-orthodoxy. 4, this point is fair to his 4th point. This point is fair, and I'm willing to discuss in further detail. I did talk with Matt about these issues and never heard anything back. I made some serious accusations of Nic that I was hoping High Point Church would take seriously. Instead, Matt talked to Mike about these issues, and Mike called 2 of my friends, and I mentioned their names, slandering me and calling me a liar behind my back. There's some more context for this that I can provide. Mike also called Tom Flaherty and said some not so nice things about me to Tom. Tom responded by saying that, quote, Andy doesn't play church politics, to which Mike told Nic that Tom claimed that I, quote, never submit to authority. A lie. Tom did not say that. I know Tom didn't say that because I called him the next day and asked. Again, these are much larger issues, but I'm willing to break them down further over the phone or in person. The statements I've made toward you and High Point Church pastors and elders, I will stand by until given biblical evidence that supports the partnering with baby murdering liberals. I take these issues of orthodoxy just as seriously as the New Testament writers. They were incredibly harsh towards false teachers and prophets and those who led the flock astray. I will push back on you on your not being against me. I will push back on your not being against me. This may or may not be true. It doesn't really matter. My claim is that you stand in opposition to the scriptures and God, not me. If my rebuke makes this conversation, quote, unproductive, quote unquote, unproductive, then Paul's first letter to the Corinthians was quote unquote unproductive, and so is Jude's epistle, both of which prescribe this strong language for those that conduct themselves contrary to the Bible. Friendship with the world is enmity with God. I am choosing to use this type of language and tone because, 1, I love High Point Church and I want it to return to Jesus, and 2, because I'm aware of the dangers of flirting with and partnering with those who do not believe in Jesus Christ and his supremacy and commands. My aim is to call you, the elders in the congregation, back to Christ, not to make you feel good. I want you to be aligned with Jesus. I will offer this again. I am willing to meet in person and discuss this all further with you. Or if you want to hear from a 7-year congregant who spent more time with Nic than any other congregant in the church. My wife would also love to be at a discussion like that. since she, in the past couple of months, met with Aaron Hesse about the exact issues. I do not want to give the impression that Andrea and I are in agreement with Aaron. We are not. In fact, in our conversation with her, we seriously disagreed. That said, Aaron made some huge claims and accusations of the elder board and Nic. Too many conversations are happening behind people's backs, and the elders are doing a horrific job of dealing with this because many of them are actually engaging in the gossip and passivity. I would love to meet. Let me know when/if you're available. Monte said, thanks, Andy. I'm going to pass on your offer to meet. This was on July 23rd. I think a meeting could be profitable, but right now, you think I stand in opposition to God and the scriptures. I'm under no obligation and certainly have no desire to defend or explain myself to you. I have tried to be moderate and find middle ground and be charitable in how I have heard you. You continue to put the worst possible constructions of things I have to say, or you continue to put the worst possible constructions on things that I have to say, calling things I say, quote, incoherent and postmodern and manipulative rhetoric, and you consider me a false prophet and teacher. This premise leaves no room for discussion. He italicized that. If you can't see that, I don't know how to help you see that. I wish you well, Monte. And that was the end of that. And I could dissect this for like 100 years. The idea that he's under no obligation as an elder to, and that he has no desire to defend or explain himself, to explain the theological reasoning as to why they're partnering with this church. He's under no obligation, except for the obligation explicitly set forth in the pastoral epistles in 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, where it says to be an elder, you have to be able to defend the faith, defend doctrine, to know the doctrine and to be able to teach it. So he is under an obligation by God, but that doesn't seem to matter to him at all. And any of the people on the elder board, they don't care about what the Bible has to say. They care about maintaining their little country club and having everybody praise them every Sunday for being the most quote unquote godly people that have ever existed or whatever. I don't know what it is, but they're getting something out of it and their pride in flesh that makes them feel really good. That was the end of that conversation. And so that was a very long thing, but I think it's essential to this entire narrative, the whole thing that I'm talking about. And so again, July 31st, phone call with Nic. The night before the podcast was released, I had that conversation with him. And then they released the podcast, and it's their most popular podcast they've ever released. And I had those emails with Monte Netter. And that was sort of the end of it for like a long time. I just never, I didn't get anything from anybody. Nobody really cared. I had received texts and heard things over the years from people like who left the church or appreciated what I had said on the podcast. But we had been meeting with people, and, the only people who said to do nothing about it were the people who lived in Madison. And the people outside of Madison were like, you got to do something. So tell the truth. And that's what I'm doing now. But there are a couple of other miscellaneous points here. So I'll say that if Nic wants to claim that I'm lying about all these things, that's okay. That's fine. I expect him to say that. He stands before God, and, that's up to him. That's his prerogative. He can go on and do another podcast where he throws ad hominems at me, calls me half-cocked, calls me a liar, makes fun of me, and does all of that. That stuff happens a lot. It doesn't happen a lot, but people, it's easy to, I'm loud and stuff, and it's like I can be the punching bag, and that's fine. But I would like for him to talk about what I'm saying, what the claims that I'm making. I would like for the elders to talk about that. What is going on? I would like for Aaron to talk about that and to stop hiding, because people are going to claim victimhood in all of this when it all falls apart. And it's not okay. When you have the information and you're not doing anything about it and it hasn't been resolved and there's no reconciliation and the whole thing is in shambles and you just sit idly by and gossip to everybody about things and don't actually deal with the problem, that's not okay. And so Nic can say whatever he wants. It doesn't matter. I'm not God. I'm not going to claim to be God. Although in my conversation with Nic that I had for 3 hours in his office years ago, he said to me that if I go against him, I go against God. And I'm not going to make that claim. I'm not God. I'm not going to pretend to be God. I'm not going to pretend that everything that I say is on the side of God. That's called using God's name in vain, and it's hubris, and it's prideful, and pride cometh before the fall. As the Bible says. And so I don't care. You can say nasty things about me. You can do whatever you want. Deal with the things that I'm saying. Deal with the evidence that I'm putting forward. Deal with the people that you've heard. Deal with the lies that you've spread and the deception, and do something about that. And then if you want to like do a whole other podcast or do something like where you trash me and make fun of me and say that I'm an idiot or a dick or whatever, that's fine. I probably would agree with some of it, and I probably would laugh, and it would be fun, and it would be a good time. But deal with what I'm saying. Respond to what I'm saying. Don't just belittle and mock like you're used to doing. Some people are going to try to make this about like this person versus this person, Andy and Aaron versus Nick and Jill or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not what it is. It's not that at all. I have, like I said, I kicked Aaron out of our house one time, called Jill to confirm some things literally this week. And I have problems with Jill and what she's doing in the psychological realm and perverting the church, and she doesn't even know what she's doing. And I feel sorry for her mostly, but her engagement in this and the mystery around her and Nick's relationship it's a mystery. That's what it is. And a lot of evidence leads towards conclusions that we shouldn't go to unless we do a proper investigation of these things. And I don't want to have any insinuation. I don't want to have any accusation. I don't know what Nick has done behind closed doors, and I'm not sure. What I am sure of is what he's told me and the events that have happened over the past 5 years or so. And that calls for, I think, a removal from the office of pastor at the very least. I don't know what else, but probably a removal of a lot of these people, a lot of these elders and pastors, which I'm not sure is going to happen, but I think that that's what that calls for, because there's deception and lies, and it's objective, and there's evidence of it. And so I'm just putting that out there. I want to mention Devin White. Devin White was an associate pastor or something at High Point. He left High Point Church for a position at Upper House, or their academic center, Lumen, or something like that is what it's called, which is like from Severance. Good show. But this came at the end of a long, difficult relationship with Nick. So Devin and Nick did not like each other at all. They had horrible relationship. In this long and difficult relationship with Nick, it was an ongoing mediation that they needed from outside parties like Tom Flaherty from City Church. I was present with Nick when he would have phone calls with related to the issue, and he told me several times that Devin wouldn't do his job, and Nick just couldn't work with him. He just couldn't stand Devin, and so when Devin left, it was sort of this like, oh yeah, he's still going to preach here and everything's all good. He just found a better opportunity. That's not true. That's a lie. He did not, and him and Nick couldn't work together, and they did not like each other at all, and that's true. And whether or not they want to lie about that, that's on them. I'm not going to lie about it. They did not like each other. Again, this goes to that initial question that woman asked in the congregational meeting. Were there unhealthy relationships? You decide. When Erin Hesse brought her accusation to the elder board, she was Nick's pastoral executive assistant at the time. After this conflict, Erin moved into a position related to small groups. An email sent out to congregants cited this as being a better fit for Erin, even though Nick told me that he refused to work with Erin. So she got moved to a different position. I don't have the email, and I could be wrong about this, but I thought that there was some sort of email sent out from the church that basically said, this is a better fit. It's blah, 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 gave all the sort of lying platitudes that organizations do, when in reality, she got moved because her and Nick did not get along. She turned him into the elder board, and he wanted nothing to do with her. And so he told them, get her out of my way, but they couldn't fire her, even though that was her threat. Like, it's a fireable offense if they didn't fire her or anything like that. She was so disruptive, and the way that they talked about her on staff is that she was so disruptive and such a big problem in the elder boards and all this. This is how they characterized her, and yet they kept her on staff. And you have to ask yourself, why would they keep her on staff if she's that disruptive to the point where the head pastor wants nothing to do with her and they have to move her to some like made up position? Why is that? And again, is that an unhealthy relationship? And has it been resolved? It hasn't been resolved. So why did that happen? And why weren't they fired? Was it because Nick was trying to save face? Because in the midst of all of this, he was trying to get these buildings and do whatever he wanted to do with building his big Nic Gibson enterprise? I don't know what it was, but that happened. That was happening at the time. And Aaron has evidence for that. At some point at the beginning of 2025, Aaron left her job, claiming that she had an ultimatum that essentially gave her no option but to leave. I don't know the details of the ultimatum or its validity. I reached out to see if I could talk to Aaron this week, and they didn't want to talk, so whatever. But this is what Aaron shared with an outside party. She shared also that some other women on staff, like Jill Reese and Nicole Kyle, were consulted and very involved in this investigation, and their retaliation in response to Aaron and their opinions were taken as truth. And so this matters because the investigation that they did on Aaron, apparently, Aaron made a claim about Nic, and then they're like, we're going to investigate Aaron. That's like classic. But they brought in Jill Reese, who especially does not like Aaron, and who has a big old notebook of all the things that she doesn't like about Aaron and all the problems and all the quotes and times that she's been slighted by Aaron and people, and she writes it all down in this notebook. And Nicole Kyle, who's unequivocally with Nic, and we'll just say whatever Nic wants, they put together this team, and these women made accusations against Aaron. Were they baseless? I don't know. Were they true? I don't know. But they weren't. They weren't cross examined. They weren't pushed back against. They were just taken as objective truth. And so she was given the ultimatum. Some of these details may not be true. I just want to say I fully anticipate that. I'm giving you what I have, which is a ton of information, and it's going to take a long time for people to work through if they want to. It's almost 2-hour podcast. Like, why am I doing this? I fully anticipate that. I think that represents the complete incompetence on behalf of the elders, and is a product of an investigation built on deception and manipulation. This is what happens when you have elders and leaders who aren't interested in doing what the Bible says. They're not interested in listening to the Bible. They're not interested in reading the Bible. They're not interested in understanding the Bible, exegeting the Bible, theologizing, knowing their responsibility in relationship to the Bible, and shepherding their flock on that basis. They're not interested in that. This is what happens when the church becomes a money-making enterprise or a tax write-off or whatever else you want to call it, and it stops being a place where Christians get together to worship God in accordance with what the scriptures say. This is what happens when there's corruption. This is what happens when you give one person too much power and they just put people in positions that they want, and they manipulate people and they lie and they get what they want out of stuff, and they talk fast. So it makes people feel like they're really smart if they listen to them. And that's what this is a result of all these things. It's a result of these things and a million other things. But ultimately it's the result of just a bunch of deception. It's really just a lot of deception, a lot of lying, a lot of belittling and mocking and slander and gossip. And that's fine. Not actually, like sinfully, it's just like not fine. But the slander and gossip about me, which has taken place on many occasions, and I don't care to defend myself against them because I'm not that important, and I don't think that, I'm not going to go out of my way to like make this all about me, is like, that's all on the side. The main points here are that there were people lying to the congregation from the pulpit and from the stage during the congregational meeting about the relationships on staff. There were multiple people for years who had told the elder board that Nic had inappropriate and unhealthy relationships with women, non-sexual, that we know of, and nothing was done about that. There were threats that were made to Nic, according to Tom Flaherty, that if this comes up again, if there's another accusation, Nic's got to go. That didn't happen. There were concerted effort from the elder board and the certain members of the staff to bully and berate and belittle Aaron Hesse by putting together evidence and opinions about her, and kind of formulating a caricature of her that isn't maybe true, or I don't know if it is, but not a whole picture, but just sort of a kind of ratty, like high school gossipy thing, which is so characteristic of the women involved, by the way. So it doesn't surprise me, but and then Nic being able to put together a bunch of rules that Aaron must obey, if that's true, Like, I'm not saying everything Aaron's saying is true. I'm just saying this is the information that I have and I'm putting it out there because there's so much lying. And people need to realize, one, don't go to this church. If you're thinking about it, don't go to it. There's other good churches. Don't go. Two, the people at the church, figure it out. You have people in your congregation. Real people have been hurt. Real people. And it's disgusting. And it's like relationships have been severed. And people just, like, you don't know what you're doing. Madison's already a bad enough place. It's a bad place filled with bad people, bad policy, bad religion, bad philosophy, evil stuff. It's Nineveh, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. Make whatever comparison you want. It's bad. Madison is bad. And what it needs is like a good church, a couple of them, maybe a couple that can like work together in some capacity to fight back against the wickedness. But instead what you're getting is this garbage, like elders who won't even have conversations with people in their conversations with people in their congregations. You have elders who are sitting here doing word games and lying about, well, what does communication mean? Well, what is language? And playing games with 22-year-olds about like what particular words mean, and that actually doesn't mean that, blah, 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 and all that crap while people are getting hurt spiritually. You have executive pastors, Mike Beresford, who's an old man, whose whole goal is to like slander and trash anybody who goes against Nic, no matter who they are, and he will gladly do it to some young kid who, myself, like, who disagrees with him and who, whatever. And so he'll do that, and he'll do it, and he's supposed to be an elder. He's supposed to be in both ways. An elder as just an older man who's supposed to be respectable, but also like he has held the position of elder before, I think. Maybe not. I can't remember if that's in the bylaws or not. But he's one of the older folks in the church that you're supposed to respect. And that's what he's doing in his free time, calling people and lying about me. And a bunch of other things. Nic's relationship with Jill is unhealthy. Everybody knows it who's on staff. A lot of people choose to lie to themselves about these things, but it's clearly obvious. The people Nic have brought on to staff, the men that he's worked with in the past, a lot of the men who have left the church have left because they cannot get along with Nic, Devin White being one of them. And then they lied to the congregation and said, it's all good, no problem. He just got a better opportunity somewhere else. That's not true. He moved to Madison from a different country to work at High Point. It didn't work because him and Nic didn't get along, because Nic doesn't get along with anybody who doesn't agree with everything he says. And so if you disagree with Nic, you got to go. And that's why I had to go. That's why other people have had to go. That's why Devin had to go. And you decide whether or not that's a good enough like pastor to have, if that's like the guy you want running your church. But the lying over all of this stuff is whatever. I mean, the lying is bad. That's the problem. And when you have a church, look, I'm fine. If they want to come out and say, look, we are just going to obey whatever Nic says no matter what, and we're not going to let anybody ask questions. If they did that, that'd be wonderful, because then you know where they stand on all this. And instead they say, we're a biblical, conservative, Calvinist, complementarian church, and we believe in the Bible and the inerrancy of Scripture, except for when we don't want to, and except for when it says that you need to defend the faith and like shepherd your flock, and when it doesn't agree with our language structures, and then we don't have to. There is a verse in 1 Timothy from Paul about who you should and shouldn't deal with within the church, false teachers and things like that. So there's a passage in 1 Timothy, I think it's in 1 Timothy, I'm looking it up right now just to make sure, on 1 Timothy. Okay. 1:10 through 16, I think. I'll read it and we'll see. As I urge you, what is this? What version is this? We got to get ourselves into something a little bit more better. Okay. As I urged you when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies, which promote speculations rather than the stewardship from God that is by faith. Sorry. The aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Certain persons, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law without understanding either of what they are saying or the things about which they make confident assertions. So that's pretty clear. Now we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, understanding this, that the law is not laid down for the just, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who strike their fathers and mothers, for murderers, the sexually immoral, men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, liars, perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine, in accordance with the gospel of the glory of the blessed God with which I have been entrusted. So that's one passage on this. And then there's another one here that I think is important to mention that I'm looking up right now. I can't remember exactly where it is. It's not even Paul. Come on. It's from the ESV, 2 Peter 2, 3, verses 16. It says, therefore, beloved, I'm going to start at 14. I think this is it. Therefore, beloved, since you are waiting for these, be diligent to be found by him without spot or blemish and at peace, and count the patience of our Lord as salvation, just as our beloved brother Paul also wrote to you according to wisdom given him, as he does in all his letters when he speaks in them of these matters. There are some things in them that are hard to understand, which the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction, as they do the other scriptures. You therefore, beloved, knowing this beforehand, take care that you are not carried away with the error of lawless people and lose your own stability, but grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. To him be the glory, both now and to the day of eternity. Amen. So these people twist the scriptures because they're ignorant of it, and they've twisted to their own destruction. The idea that partnering with a church that supports these things is what Nic would call a disputable matter. That's twisting things that he's ignorant of, that he doesn't understand. It's not a disputable matter. It never has been, and it never will be. You don't partner with churches that murder children, that support the murder of children. You don't do that. And that's not difficult to find in the Bible. It's everywhere. Murdering babies is bad everywhere, in every society, throughout all of human history. And the ones that do it a lot fall quickly and badly. And so these are just a couple verses. My goal here, and I'll finish this off real soon. The question might be just like, what's the goal then? Why? So you put all this information out here. What's the goal with all this? My goal is, one, repentance. I hope that they repent first, like repentance first. Let's repent of this wickedness and move on in a proper way, to say we were wrong. We didn't take these accusations seriously. We didn't take our own selves seriously. When we made conditions and rules that were broken, we didn't follow through with our consequences that we had put out beforehand and said that we would do, and like move forward properly. Like, own up to what you did that was stupid. Admit that you were wrong. Nic needs to be out of the pastorate for sure. Mike needs to be out of the pastorate for sure. No doubt at all. These men are out of alignment with what an elder is called to be in the Bible, and figure out what to do after that. Take the guy who's like a pro-homosexual guy out of the elder board, and like stop with the BLM, CRT nonsense and your multiculturalism and all this like 2010 Russell Moore Christianity Today nonsense. It's like no one likes that anymore. People hate it because it's cudgeled worldliness, cudgeled into the Bible, forced in by men, ignorant men. Stop doing that stuff. Tell the truth. And look, this podcast itself is open to particular people. Like, I will have basically anybody on. Nic is not coming on. The elders are not coming on. Mike is not coming on. They get their platforms to spew their nonsense every Sunday on their podcast. But they get to do that. They can do that. They can come out and say whatever they want. They can trash me. They can belittle me. That's fine. You do that in your own time. If Aaron wants to come on this podcast, she certainly can. If Jill Reese wants to come on, she certainly can. Maybe even Tom Flaherty. Like, I don't, he's a pastor at a different church. But if, and maybe even Monty Netter, I don't know, whatever. But like, if people want to, if there's things that I'm missing, fine, that's fine. I don't edit. I don't edit other people's words, and you can say whatever you want, and I won't change a single thing about it. But there are there's lying happening, and it should just be out there. And for people who have listened this far who don't go to High Point, don't go to High Point. Go to a different church. Find a different church. And pray for the repentance of High Point and the other churches in Madison who continue to defile God's name and blaspheme his name and bastardize his children for personal gain. It's sickening. It's disgusting. And so that's this podcast. I hope to never have to talk about this again. I don't know what's going to come of this. I am doing more interesting podcasts in the future, and I hope people will listen to those. I'm tired. And I'll just finish this. I like the people at High Point that we've lost relationships with. Like, I valued those relationships and I care about those people. And I even care about Nic and I care about Mike. And these are real people. And I like them and I care about them. And I had good memories with a lot of these people, and I haven't talked to them in years, and it sucks. But that's the result of these sorts of situations. And you can't just like brush that aside and pretend like, oh, who cares? These people suck. Like, I don't think that I don't know. I mean, time will tell if these people are truly as evil as they're acting like right now. But I valued those relationships. I cared about them. In retrospect, there's been a lot of things that I've thought through and like, who knows? But the goal, like, there's no personal gain here. There's only downside. It's like more people are probably just going to say bad things about me. That's fine. I don't care. I don't really. But the